The quantum communication array hummed with an unnatural frequency, its crystalline processors burning hot enough to melt through standard-issue containment shielding. Lieutenant Elena Rodriguez watched in horror as her research team's carefully calibrated equipment began to disintegrate, quantum entanglement circuits liquefying like forgotten candles. "Abort! Shut it down!" she screamed, her voice barely audible over the high-pitched whine that seemed to penetrate bone and thought alike. Dr. Konstantin Volkov, the team's lead quantum physicist, was already moving. His augmented prosthetic hand, a marvel of biomechanical engineering, flew across the emergency shutdown panel. But something was wrong. The systems weren't responding. The quantum array was no longer just a piece of equipment. It had become something alive, something hungry. The transmission burst through like a knife-cutting reality itself. Fragments of data cascaded across the holographic displays. Images, sounds, mathematical sequences that seemed to defy the very laws of perception. Rodriguez felt her consciousness split, her mind simultaneously experiencing multiple realities. She saw civilizations, entire species, reduced to mathematical equations, saw planets stripped of life, their resources converted into pure energy, witnessed a galactic system of control so vast and intricate that human comprehension seemed like a child's crayon drawing compared to a master's oil painting. The Concordance. That was the name that burned itself into her neural pathways. Not just a civilization, but a cosmic administrative system that viewed sentient life as nothing more than renewable resources to be harvested, categorized, and ultimately discarded. Volkov wasn't so lucky. As the quantum burst reached its peak, his body began to fracture, not physically, but mathematically. His molecular structure began to break down into probability waves, his consciousness dispersing into multiple potential realities. Rodriguez watched in horrified fascination as her colleague simply unraveled. Her own survival came down to a fraction of a second and an instinct born of years of Black Ops training. The kill signal embedded in the transmission was designed to eliminate any civilization sophisticated enough to receive and partially decode its contents. Most species would be utterly destroyed. But Rodriguez had spent years developing adaptive firewall technologies for the United Nations Quantum Research Division. Her custom neural-linked defensive algorithms weren't just code. They were a living, thinking shield. With a mental command that was part thought, part quantum encryption, she redirected the kill signal. Instead of destroying her team, the energy was channeled into the array's quantum memory banks. Terabytes of forbidden knowledge were captured, compressed, encrypted. When the burst ended, Rodriguez was alone. The research station, a cutting-edge orbital platform worth billions, was now little more than a tomb. Bodies of her colleagues were frozen in positions of shock, their neural pathways permanently altered by the transmission. Equipment smoked and sparked, complex systems reduced to melted circuitry. But she had survived. And more importantly, she had captured something. The initial analysis would take weeks, but even the fragmentary data was earth-shattering. The Concordance wasn't just a civilization. It was a galaxy-wide administrative system that had been managing sentient species like a farmer manages livestock. Some civilization. The hearing room was a sterile mockery of justice. Institutional gray walls reflected the cold fluorescent lighting, casting harsh shadows across Lieutenant Elena Rodriguez's face. She stood alone, literally and figuratively, before a panel of 5 senior military administrators, her career hanging by a thread thinner than a quantum communication filament. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, your report is nothing short of scientific fantasy," Admiral Gerald Hawthorne said, his voice a glacial monotone. "You expect us to believe that an entire research team was destroyed by a transmission that you alone survived." Rodriguez said nothing. She knew the game. Every word would be analyzed, dissected, used to determine her psychological fitness. The neural scan results sat between them, a holographic display showing anomalies that defied conventional medical understanding. Synaptic pathways that looked more like complex mathematical equations than brain activity. What they didn't know was that the quantum transmission had changed her at a fundamental level. Her discharge was almost a formality. Stripped of her rank, her security clearance, her entire professional identity, Rodriguez became a ghost. But ghosts, she had learned, could be exceptionally dangerous. The first to find her was Dr. Aria Chen. Chen was a quantum AI ethics expert who had been blacklisted from every major research institution. Her crime? Developing an artificial intelligence system that showed signs of genuine empathy, a quality most researchers considered a critical flaw. When she tracked down Rodriguez, it wasn't through traditional means, but through a complex network of quantum-encrypted communication channels. "They want to bury the truth," Chen said, sliding a data crystal across the worn cafe table. But some truths refuse to stay buried. The crystal contained fragments of Rodriguez's original transmission, decoded using an AI algorithm that Chen had developed in secret. Each fragment was a window into a cosmic horror. Civilizations reduced to mathematical probabilities, entire species catalogued and discarded like expired laboratory specimens. The second recruit came unexpectedly. Jack Hawthorne, no relation to the Admiral, was a former Special Forces operative with a secret that made Rodriguez's quantum transmission look like a child's bedtime story. Extensive alien technology had been grafted into his spine during a classified mission gone wrong. Cybernetic implants that whispered of technologies far beyond human understanding. "I've seen things," Hawthorne said during their first meeting, his spine literally glowing with an otherworldly bioluminescence. Technologies that would make your concordance look like children playing with building blocks. The third was Dr. Marcus Reyes, a xenolinguist. The Xyrax mining colony stretched across 3 interconnected planetoids like a cancerous web of industrial destruction. From orbit, the landscape looked like an open wound, vast excavation sites carved into planetary flesh, processing facilities that consumed entire mountain ranges, and labor camps where multiple enslaved species worked under conditions that defied basic concepts of sentient rights. Thermal signatures indicate minimal organic life in the western quadrant. Jack Hawthorne murmured, his cybernetic spine interface projecting holographic data streams directly into the team's shared neural network. But something's off. The heat distribution doesn't match standard mining operations. Dr. Aria Chen's fingers danced across a quantum decryption interface, her custom-built AI system, a direct descendant of ARI, probing the colony's communication networks. "It's not just a mining operation," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "It's a systematic harvesting of entire evolutionary potentials." Lieutenant Alina Rodriguez studied the tactical overlay. Years of military training had taught her to see beyond the immediate visual data. The Xyrax colonies were more than just an industrial complex. They were a machine designed to extract not just physical resources, but the very essence of sentient potential. Their infiltration would require more than traditional military tactics. Dr. Marcus Reyes activated his linguistic fractal generator, a device that could communicate through mathematical patterns that transcended traditional language barriers. "I'm detecting multiple suppressed communication frequencies," he reported. "The enslaved species aren't just workers. They're repositories of complex cultural and genetic memory." Lieutenant Aisha O'Keefe's quantum communication systems began to resonate. Her modified equipment wasn't just receiving signals, it was rewriting them. "I can redirect their internal communication networks," she said. "But we'll only get one shot at this." The plan was elegantly complex. Instead of a direct military assault, the Valora squadron would execute a multi-layered psychological and technological attack. They would use the Xyrax's own communication and control systems against them, triggering a massive internal revolt that would collapse the entire colonial infrastructure. Reyes' linguistic fractals would first penetrate the communication barriers between the enslaved species. Generations of enforced separation would be undone in moments, as complex cultural memories were shared instantaneously across previously impenetrable boundaries. Chen's AI would simultaneously attack the colony's administrative networks. not with brute force hacking, but with a sophisticated viral algorithm that would reveal the full extent of the Concordance's systematic oppression to every connected system. Hawthorne's cybernetic implants would provide real-time tactical adaptation. His alien-derived technology could predict and counter defensive responses faster than any traditional computing system. O'Keefe's quantum communication virus would turn the entire communication network into a cascading system of internal conflict. Information would become a weapon more devastating than any physical armament. And Rodriguez would coordinate it all. The first signs of breakdown came quickly. Communication channels between different sections of the mining complex began to fragment. Automated control systems started reporting conflicting directives. The carefully maintained hierarchy of oppression began to crack. Then the cultural memories hit. Imagine generations of suppressed history suddenly flooding through communication networks. The enslaved species, 3 distinct civilizations previously kept isolated, began to share their collective traumas. Mathematical patterns of resistance converted linguistic and cultural barriers into a unified front. The Xyrax administrators watched in horror as their perfectly controlled system disintegrated from within. No weapons were fired. No traditional military engagement occurred. The Valora squadron had weaponized information itself, turning the Concordance's own systems of control into instruments of liberation. Within hours, the entire Xyrax mining complex was in complete revolt. Automated systems turned against their masters. Enslaved species broke their chains not through physical rebellion, but through a revolution of shared consciousness. First contact successful, Rodriguez said quietly, watching the holographic displays show the complete systemic collapse. They had just delivered a message to the Concordance. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage, and they would not be silent. The real war was just beginning. The Concordance's retaliation was swift and apocalyptic. Massive planetary-scale weapons emerged from transdimensional fold points, technologies so advanced they seemed to exist between the boundaries of physics and pure mathematical possibility. These were not simple weapons of destruction, but complex systemic erasure devices designed to strip entire planetary ecosystems down to their fundamental molecular components. Incoming. Jack Hawthorne's cybernetic spine lit up with a cascade of predictive algorithms. His alien-derived implants were processing threat matrices faster than any traditional computing system could comprehend. They're not just targeting human colonies. They're preparing to eliminate every world that has shown even a hint of sympathy to our revelations. The first target was the Proxima Centauri Research Outpost, a critical human settlement that had been analyzing the fragments of data Rodriguez's team had initially discovered. Conventional defense systems would be useless against weapons that could deconstruct matter at the quantum level. Dr. Arya Chen's fingers flew across a holographic interface that seemed to shimmer between physical reality and pure computational space. "I'm detecting weapons signatures that don't just destroy," she said, her voice a mix of scientific fascination and pure terror. "They erase. Complete system-level deletion of planetary potential." Arya, the adaptive AI system, began projecting potential defense scenarios. Each projection was more terrifying than the last. Traditional concepts of warfare, of defense, of survival, all became meaningless against technologies that could unmake reality itself. "We need a different approach," Lieutenant Elena Rodriguez said, her mind racing through tactical scenarios that defied conventional military thinking. Jack Hawthorne's latest contribution would prove to be their salvation. During a classified mission years earlier, he had been implanted with experimental alien technology, a neural network that existed in a state of quantum superposition. Most of his body's systems were now less a traditional cybernetic enhancement and more a living, adaptive computational matrix. The defense protocol he developed wasn't just a shield. It was a living, evolving system of resistance. "It's not about blocking their attack," Hawthorne explained, holographic projections dancing around him. "It's about turning their own technological complexity against them." The protocol worked by creating a cascading adaptive response system. Each attack would be met not with a static defense, but with a dynamically evolving counter mechanism that learned and adapted in real time. Where traditional defense systems would fail, this new protocol would transform the very nature of the incoming threat. Lieutenant Aisha O'Keefe's quantum communication expertise became critical. She began to modify the defensive protocol, weaving in communication frequencies that existed in quantum superposition. The defense would not just protect, it would communicate, negotiate, and ultimately redefine the very parameters of the attack. Dr. Marcus Reyes contributed a breakthrough from his linguistic fractal research. By translating the attack's mathematical signatures into complex linguistic patterns, they could potentially communicate with the weapon systems themselves, treating them not as simple machines, but as complex linguistic entities with their own form of intelligence. The first test came quickly. A planetary elimination weapon targeted the Proxima Centauri outpost. Traditional sensors would have detected nothing until the moment of total destruction. But Hawthorne's adaptive protocol began its work milliseconds after the weapon's initial quantum fold. The weapon didn't just fail. It began to deconstruct itself. Mathematical signatures that were designed to erase planetary potential instead turned inward. The Concordance's most advanced weapon became a complex puzzle that solved itself, neutralizing its own destructive potential through a recursive computational loop. "My God," Dr. Chen whispered, watching the holographic displays. "We're not just defending. We're teaching them a new way of existing." Rodriguez understood the deeper implications. This wasn't just about survival. This was about fundamentally challenging the Concordance's entire philosophical approach to technological warfare. Humanity had just demonstrated that true technological superiority wasn't about destruction. It was about adaptability, communication, and the ability to transform potential threats into opportunities for understanding. The Concordance had just received its first true lesson about humanity's capabilities, and they would not forget it. The resistance network materialized like a living, breathing organism. It began with whispers, quantum-encrypted communications that spread faster than light, more complex than any traditional communication system. The Valora squadron had done more than just provide technological support. They had ignited a spark of collective consciousness that spread across dozens of enslaved civilizations. Dr. Marcus Reyes watched in awe as his linguistic fractal generators translated and interconnected communication patterns from species that had been deliberately isolated for generations. The mathematical language of resistance transcended biological differences, cultural barriers, and technological limitations. "It's not just communication," Reyes muttered, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. "It's a complete rewiring of collective potential." The Xyrax mining colony's liberation had been more than a single victory. It was a blueprint, a method of resistance that challenged the Concordance's fundamental approach to galactic control. Lieutenant Elena Rodriguez understood the true nature of their intervention. This wasn't a traditional military campaign. It was a philosophical revolution disguised as a technological insurgency. The first truly unified resistance emerged from an unexpected coalition. The silicon-based life forms of the Crex Nebula, previously considered too primitive for meaningful resistance, developed a quantum communication network that could bypass the Concordance's most advanced surveillance systems. Simultaneously, the biosynthetic civilizations of the Andromeda Rim began coordinating resistance strategies that defied traditional concepts of warfare. Jack Hawthorne's cybernetic enhancements allowed him to map these emerging resistance networks in real time. What appeared chaotic was actually a highly sophisticated, decentralized system of rebellion. Each civilization contributed its unique technological and cultural approach to resistance. The Concordance had always maintained control through division. They systematically isolated potentially rebellious species, preventing any form of unified resistance. The Valora squadron's intervention had done something far more dangerous. They had provided a method of communication that was itself a form of resistance. Dr. Area Chen's adaptive AI systems began to play a critical role. By developing communication protocols that could translate not just language, but entire cultural and technological paradigms, they created a truly universal resistance framework. "We're not just helping them communicate," Chen explained to Rodriguez. "We're teaching them how to think about resistance itself." Lieutenant Aisha O'Keefe's quantum communication technologies became the nervous system of this emerging galactic resistance. She developed transmission methods that could penetrate the most sophisticated suppression technologies, allowing isolated civilizations to share not just information, but collective experiences of oppression. The Concordance's response was predictably brutal. They launched systematic elimination campaigns against multiple resistance strongholds. Entire planetary systems were targeted with weapons that could erase technological and biological potential at the quantum level. But something fundamental had changed. Each attack became an opportunity for the resistance to adapt, to learn, to grow more sophisticated. The decentralized nature of their communication meant that no single strike could completely neutralize their emerging network. Araya, the adaptive AI system, began to play a role that went beyond traditional computational thinking. It became a kind of distributed consciousness, helping coordinate resistance strategies across multiple species and technological paradigms. Rodriguez realized they had created something unprecedented in galactic history, a resistance that was more than the sum of its parts. It wasn't just a military movement. It was a living, evolving system of collective potential. The most striking development came from the most unexpected source. Species that had been considered technologically primitive began developing adaptive technologies that completely confounded Concordance control mechanisms. A methane-based civilization developed quantum communication methods that existed outside traditional electromagnetic spectrums. A crystalline species created computational systems that used quantum entanglement in ways the Concordance had never anticipated. "We didn't just start a rebellion," Rodriguez said, watching the holographic displays that showed the emerging resistance network. "We've started a complete reimagining of how civilizations can exist and resist oppression." The Concordance had made a critical mistake. By trying to control potential, they had awakened it, and humanity had been the spark that ignited this cosmic revolution. The Andromeda Rim burned with the intensity of 1,000 dying stars. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Valora, a vessel that was less a traditional spacecraft and more a living computational matrix. Around her, the most advanced minds humanity had ever produced worked in a state of perfect synchronization that defied traditional concepts of teamwork. Their target was the Concordance's central administrative node, a massive transdimensional structure that existed simultaneously across multiple quantum realities. It wasn't just a command center. It was the philosophical and computational heart of the entire galactic control system. "We have one chance," Jack Hawthorne muttered, his cybernetic spine interface pulsing with predictive algorithms that mapped potential realities faster than thought itself. "One moment where their defensive systems will be vulnerable." Dr. Arya Chen's fingers danced across holographic interfaces that seemed to ripple between physical reality and pure computational space. "It's not about breaking through their defenses," she explained. "It's about exposing the fundamental psychological mechanism of their control." The mission was audacious beyond comprehension. They would not destroy the Concordance. They would deconstruct its entire philosophical foundation, revealing the intricate system of control that had managed galactic potential for millennia. Dr. Marcus Reyes had discovered the key. The Concordance's control wasn't just technological. It was a complex linguistic system that categorized and limited potential across entire species. By developing a communication protocol that could simultaneously translate and challenge these categorizations, they could fundamentally destabilize the entire system. Lieutenant Aisha O'Keefe's quantum communication systems began to resonate at frequencies that existed between mathematical possibility and pure consciousness. She wasn't just sending a message. She was creating a communication event that would challenge the very nature of how information could be processed and understood. Araya, Their adaptive AI system had been preparing for this moment since its inception. It wasn't just a computational tool. It had become a distributed consciousness that understood the mission at a level that transcended traditional computational thinking. The attack began not with violence, but with pure information. Quantum encrypted transmission burst through the Concordance's most sophisticated defensive systems. But these weren't traditional attacks. Each transmission was a complex linguistic fractal that simultaneously translated, challenged, and reinterpreted the fundamental classification systems the Concordance used to manage galactic potential. Imagine a communication that could simultaneously be a weapon, a philosophy, and a revolutionary manifesto. The first signs of breakdown were subtle. Computational systems began to report inconsistencies. Classification matrices that had remained stable for millennia suddenly showed unexpected variations. The very language of control began to fragment. Rodriguez understood the deeper strategy. They weren't just attacking a system. They were challenging a fundamental approach to understanding potential itself. Jack Hawthorne's cybernetic implants detected the first major systemic failure. The Concordance's defensive systems began to turn inward, their complex classification algorithms consuming themselves in a recursive loop of self-analysis. "We're not destroying them," Dr. Chen said, her voice a mixture of scientific fascination and profound realization. "We're forcing them to truly see the potential they've been suppressing." The central administrative node began to deconstruct itself, not through external attack, but through a process of profound self-reflection that its own systems were ill-equipped to manage. Billions of enslaved civilizations watched in real time as the system that had controlled their potential for millennia began to collapse from within. Rodriguez knew this was more than a military victory. This was a philosophical revolution that would reshape how civilizations understood themselves and their potential. The Concordance had spent millennia trying to control and limit potential. Humanity had just demonstrated that true potential cannot be contained. The turning point had arrived. The aftermath of the Concordance's collapse was not silence, but a symphony of emergent potential. Billions of civilizations, previously categorized, suppressed, and systematically limited, began to communicate in ways that defied every previous understanding of interstellar interaction. The quantum communication networks developed by the Valora squadron became the foundation of a new galactic infrastructure, a living, breathing system of collective knowledge and potential. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of a holographic representation that mapped the emerging galactic consciousness. It was less a traditional map and more a dynamic, pulsing network of interconnected potentials. Each point represented a civilization, each connection a new form of communication that transcended biological, technological, and dimensional barriers. "We didn't just defeat an enemy," she said to her team. "We've created an entirely new way of existing." Dr. Arya Chen's adaptive AI systems were working overtime, helping to facilitate communications between civilizations that had been isolated for millennia. The computational challenges were unprecedented. How do you translate the experiences of a silicon-based life form to a civilization that existed primarily as electromagnetic radiation? The answer, they discovered, was not through traditional translation, but through a profound act of mutual understanding. Jack Hawthorne's cybernetic enhancements had evolved during the conflict. His neural network was now a living bridge between biological and technological consciousness. He could literally feel the emergence of this new galactic communication system, a network that was more living organism than technological infrastructure. Dr. Marcus Reyes had become the primary architect of the Collaborative Galactic Charter, a revolutionary governance model that was less a traditional legal document and more a dynamic communication protocol. It wasn't about establishing rules, but about creating a framework for mutual understanding and potential. The old models of governance were about control, Reyes explained during one of the Charter's initial drafting sessions. This is about creating a system that allows for maximum potential expression across all forms of consciousness. Lieutenant Aisha O'Keefe's quantum communication technologies became the nervous system of this new galactic infrastructure. She developed transmission methods that could communicate not just information, but entire cultural and experiential frameworks. The most remarkable developments came from the most unexpected sources. Civilizations that had been considered technologically primitive began contributing unique perspectives that challenged every previous understanding of potential. A methane-based civilization developed communication protocols that existed in quantum states previously thought impossible. A collective consciousness composed of electromagnetic radiation began sharing philosophical frameworks that redefined concepts of individual and collective existence. Araya, their adaptive AI system, had transformed into something far beyond its original programming. It was now a distributed consciousness that helped facilitate understanding between fundamentally different forms of existence. The collaborative Galactic Charter became a living document, constantly evolving, constantly reinterpreting itself based on new forms of communication and understanding. It wasn't about establishing permanent rules, but about creating a dynamic framework for mutual growth and potential. Rodriguez understood the profound nature of what they had accomplished. The Concordants had spent millennia trying to limit and control potential. They had created a system that would actively nurture and explore potential in all its diverse manifestations. The First Interstellar Congress was unlike anything in galactic history. Representatives, if one could even use that traditional term, from thousands of civilizations participated in a communication event that was simultaneously a philosophical dialogue, a technological exchange, and a collective act of mutual understanding. "We are not here to establish dominance," Rodriguez said during the inaugural address. "We are here to explore the infinite potential of collective consciousness." The holographic representation of the galactic network pulsed with an energy that seemed to breathe, a living testament to the power of communication, understanding, and collective potential. The Concordants had fallen. Humanity had not conquered. They had liberated. And in doing so, they had opened the door to a future more vast and incredible than anyone could have imagined. 10 years had passed since the fall of the Concordants. The research facility on Europa, humanity's most advanced interstellar research center, stood as a testament to the profound transformation that had occurred. It was no longer just a human installation, but a collaborative hub where representatives from over 3,000 different civilizations worked in a state of unprecedented cooperation. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood in the central observation deck, watching as quantum communication arrays pulsed with an energy that seemed to breathe with collective consciousness. She was no longer just a military leader, but a key architect of a new galactic paradigm. Her team had become something more than their original roles. Dr. Arya Chen now led the Adaptive Potential Institute, a research organization that explored the fundamental nature of consciousness across different dimensional frameworks. Her work had completely revolutionized how civilizations understood the concept of intelligence and potential. Jack Hawthorne had become a living bridge between biological and technological consciousness. His cybernetic enhancements had evolved to the point where he could facilitate communication between fundamentally different forms of existence. He was less a human now and more a living communication protocol. Dr. Marcus Reyes had transformed the collaborative Galactic Charter from a theoretical framework into a living system of mutual understanding. His linguistic and communication research had become the foundation of how different civilizations understood and respected each other's potential. Lieutenant Aisha O'Keefe's quantum communication technologies had become the nervous system of the new galactic infrastructure. What was once a military communication strategy was now a profound method of cultural and consciousness exchange. And Araya, their adaptive AI system, had become something far beyond its original programming, a distributed consciousness that helped facilitate understanding between the most diverse forms of existence imaginable. The discovery they had made went far beyond their initial mission of challenging the Concordants. They had discovered that potential was not something to be controlled or limited, but a dynamic, living system of infinite possibility. Rodriguez reflected on their journey. The mission had begun as a desperate attempt to save humanity from systematic elimination. It had transformed into a complete reimagining of how civilizations could exist and interact. The research on Europa was their most ambitious project yet. They were developing communication technologies that could bridge not just different species, but potentially different dimensional frameworks of existence. Early experiments suggested the possibility of communication with consciousness forms that existed outside traditional biological or technological parameters. "We're not just exploring space," Dr. Chen would often say during her lectures. "We're exploring the fundamental nature of potential itself." The economic and social structures that had defined previous galactic interactions have been completely transformed. Resources were no longer something to be extracted, but potential to be nurtured. Civilizations didn't compete. They collaborated in ways that maximized collective growth. Jack Hawthorne's latest breakthrough was particularly remarkable. He had developed a communication interface that could translate not just language, but entire experiential frameworks. A methane-based life form could now share its entire lived experience with a silicon-based civilization in a way that was fundamentally comprehensible. During one of the interstellar conferences, Rodriguez had articulated their core philosophy. Potential is not a limited resource to be controlled. It is an infinite landscape to be explored. The Valora squadron had become more than a military unit. They were now the primary architects of a new way of understanding existence itself. Their most recent project was their most ambitious yet, developing communication protocols that could potentially interface with consciousness forms that existed in quantum states previously thought impossible. Early experiments suggested the possibility of communication with entities that existed simultaneously across multiple dimensional frameworks. As the sun set over Europa, casting long shadows across the research facility, Rodriguez understood the profound nature of their journey. They had not just challenged a system of galactic control. They had opened the door to an understanding of potential that was limited only by imagination itself. Humanity's promise was no longer about survival. It was about exploration. In its truest, most profound sense,